Hello, and welcome to our professional development session on strategies for teaching informational text. Before we get started here this afternoon, I just want to take a second to kind of introduce myself. I know I'm the graduate assistant that shows up to your TBT meetings on Wednesday mornings, and you're probably not exactly sure what my purpose here is at Fostoria Junior Senior High School. However, I am working on a Title I practicum. I've been working with 3 struggling students that Mrs. Stoltz has helped me identify, and I've been administering to them a series of reading assessments that I'm going to take back and analyze, write up a case report, and make some suggestions on interventions and possible accommodations that would help these students in the classroom. When I'm not working with these students, I do teach some social studies lessons with Mrs. Stoltz. We've been working on integrating reading and writing into social studies because, after all, we are all teachers of reading, even as the history department here at Fostoria. So I was actually able to pick my topic for this professional development session, and I chose strategies for teaching informational text because I know that's something you all have been working on this semester, and it's something you truly value and something that the students need to know. So I wanted to give this professional development session as a kind of way to give back to all of you for having me with you this semester. So here are some different strategies for teaching informational text. Some of them are technology based and some of them are not. So let's get started. So the first strategy I want to talk about is something that we should all be pretty familiar with, and that's just the use of text features when you're talking about informational text. So some of the main text features that come to mind are titles, graphics, any images that have been included with a piece of writing, bullet points, keywords, which are usually indicated by bold print, as well as the index, table of contents, and glossary. And then you also have headings and subheadings and graphs, charts, and maps. So when I think of text features, I think of myself as a student and how much reading I do a week for class. And when I come across a big picture, a big graph, usually even in my head as a graduate student, I'm like, awesome, that's one thing I can skip over. That's one less thing I have to read. However, I'm really doing myself an injustice by not paying attention to those things on the page. The author chose to include that for some reason. So it's important that our students recognize the importance, and especially with even headings and subheadings, they're overwhelmed by an entire chapter of information, but they can really hone in on one piece of information if they pay attention to the headings and subheadings or the keywords in bold print. So these are just some things to review with your high schoolers. I know it might seem a little a topic that they would cover in English class, but it's definitely something you would want to review in your social studies classroom. So the next strategy I want to talk to you about is kind of based off the first one. This is called text predictions, and utilizing those nonfiction text features that we just spoke about, students are going to make a prediction about what they're going to be reading about. And this can be done just as a simple phrase. I think I'm going to learn about this because of this. So for example, if you handed them a document, a picture with a picture of the Declaration of Independence on it, it was headed the Declaration of Independence, the students could reasonably predict, I think I will be learning about the Declaration of Independence because the title is the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that simple, but that's just an example for you. But oftentimes, just to make a prediction and just to take a guess about what you're going to be reading about can be extremely helpful for a student. The next strategy is evidence-based questioning, and this is actually a strategy I've been using with Mrs. Stoltz's students this semester. But basically, this strategy requires a teacher to go in, use an article, and read through the article, find 3 to 5 questions. It's not a huge number of questions by any means, that are answer questions about topics that were covered throughout the reading. And what the students are going to do, they're going to go through, read it, read the questions, and then they're actually going to highlight where they found the answers to the questions in that text. So they're just trying to prove that they can go back from that article and find the necessary information to answer questions. It's a critical thinking skill, and this is really important test-taking skill for standardized testing, so might be something you want to try with your students this semester. Text coding is kind of similar to evidence-based questioning. It involves the student going through a piece of informational text, and they are actually going to use a coding system to mark things that they find interesting or important throughout the text. So this is just an example of a coding system. It does not have to be set in stone. You can come up with one that you use as a class, or the students can come up with one that they're comfortable using, but it's just a series of symbols that they can use to mark different things throughout the text. obviously I think the most important things are questions that they might have about the text or important key information. But this allows the students to go back into a piece of text and find important information easily and without having to go back and reread that whole piece of information. So this might be something you want to try in the classroom, might be something more for use independently with students in the classroom. So the next strategy I want to talk about is called Post-it note prioritizing. And this would be perfect to use with an informational text article or maybe a chapter from the textbook. But basically, students are going to go through and place a Post-it note on each section or paragraph and write down important information from the section. So this would definitely be a summary-based activity as they're going to be pulling those key details that would be relevant and important to remember. Typically when this comes to mind, I think of it being more of a group assignment, and I think of it as using a Post-it note for each section. Maybe every paragraph might be overwhelming to students, but I think of assigning a chapter to students to explore and kind of teach their peers about a certain section so that all the sections are getting covered, but students aren't responsible for that entire chapter of reading, which can also be overwhelming. And you can share this through a gallery walk, or you can have students teach each other, whichever is more beneficial in your classroom. This next strategy, Word Splash, is actually a newer strategy to me as well. However, I really enjoyed learning about it, and I think it's kind of cool, especially for use with maybe the younger students, so those of you with 7th and 8th graders. This strategy requires a teacher to go through and preview a text and select some keywords or concepts, and these students are going to be given these keywords in isolation, so just a list of important vocabulary terms from the selection, and students are going to predict how those words might fit together. So back to those text predictions, making an educated guess using their background knowledge. So it really requires students to draw on things that they already know. So once students have gone through, they're going to review the words, make a prediction, and write a short paragraph about what they think the article is about. And then they would go back, read the article, and then do kind of a compare and contrast type activity between what they thought the article was going to be about and what it was actually about. So this is a vocabulary-based activity, and like I said, I think it's perfect for use with the younger students. Since this is a newer concept to most people, I did create a Smartboard template, and I'll go back at the end of this presentation and show you some of the Smartboard templates that I created for you all. Graphic organizers are another great strategy for teaching informational text. Definitely old school, we've heard about graphic organizers, but high schoolers are not too old to use graphic organizers. And once again, I've noticed you all have these great smart boards, but they don't get a lot of action or use. So I thought that it would be nice to create some different smart board templates that you could use, just pull them up really quick, that they could be used with just about any type of informational text that you see fit. So I created for you a cause and effect graphic organizer, a compare and contrast, and a 3-2-1 graphic organizer as well. And if you're not familiar with the 3-2-1 strategy, that's 3 things you learned, 2 things you found interesting, and 1 question you might have about a piece of reading. So I created those Smartboard templates for you, as well as a Frame It template, because I know how much you enjoy using the Frame It, and I'll go back and show you those Smartboard templates as soon as we finish up this presentation. So this next strategy is definitely a little bit more technology based. It's a great website called Wordle, and Wordle is a website that you plug in vocabulary words, key terms, key details from a piece of reading, and it creates a beautiful word cloud for you. So if you take a look at this, this is a word cloud created with Wordle about teaching. So some of the big words that stand out: children, instruction, classrooms. These are all things that are important in the realm of teaching. However, this could easily be applied to a social studies classroom. You go through, you give students a piece of text that they're required to read, and then you could have them create a Wordle about what they thought was the most important part of the passage. I think you'd be surprised to see, obviously they would all have some major key terms, but the students are going to pick and pull different things, and I think this is a great way to let them express their creativity. I also know that this would work well in your classroom because you all have access to the netbooks. Every student can have a computer, and it could easily be completed in class as an assignment. Class discussions are also another important strategy for using informational text in the classroom. But when we think of classroom discussions and high schoolers, we know that high schoolers are not necessarily always the most eager to participate or get involved. And given that students are so immersed in a world of technology, I think it's important to pay attention to that aspect and have them engage in discussion online. I know it's not maybe the most traditional way of having a classroom discussion, but I think it's more on our students' level, and I think it gets them engaged in that technology every day. So I've picked 3 websites that I think are particularly great for classroom discussions. The first one is Edmodo, the second one is called Blogger.com, and the third one is Weebly.com. I really want to focus on Edmodo because I think it's more of a discussion forum. However, Blogger and Weebly can be used for students to create blogs or maybe response journals. And like I said, I can send this presentation out to you, and the links are right in the presentation, so you can click on these websites and explore them on your own. But I want to take some time and kind of look at what Edmodo is and what it has to offer for our students. So if you take a look here, this is the interface of Edmodo, and it should look very familiar to those Facebook users in the room because it is structured very similar to Facebook. However, it is all educational content. So this is an example of a literature discussion, or I'm sorry, a literature circle that I had with some students when I was doing my student teaching. And it's really great for interacting with students. You can make a post, you can make a poll, students can respond directly to you, they can private message you so that if they have a question they don't maybe want to ask in front of the whole class. It's great for online discussion, and it would be easy for students to learn how to use because, like I said, it is structured so similar to Facebook. The great part about this is you can monitor everything that goes on here, so there wouldn't be any types of situations that would arise where students are being mean to each other or not following directions, because you can actually monitor this and you would be an active participant in the Edmodo site. Like I said, this is probably my first choice for online discussion use. I think it's a great website, and I think it has a lot to offer, especially since you can have such a big involvement in it as well. So the last strategy I want to discuss with you all about teaching informational text in the classroom is using newspapers as informational text. I think when we hear the words informational text, textbooks, or even in social studies, primary source documents come to mind. However, that's not the only source of informational text. Students are going to be surrounded by informational text in the form of a newspaper. And newspapers are a great way to get students involved in what's going on in the world. Students need to stay informed, and newspapers contain factual information that's both relevant and timely to these students. I think one of the biggest benefits about using a newspaper as informational text is that many newspapers are now published online, and you can receive access to these newspapers completely free. And another perk is the discussion forums that often accompany newspaper articles. So a student could possibly be asked to read an article, make an assignment, post back to the author of that article, and then they could just submit to you the link and you could go check it from there. So just another way to get students immersed in technology, immersed in what's going around or going on with them in the world around them. So just another important thing and something else for you to consider while you're focusing on some new strategies to work with your students.
Don't be offended if I take a minute to fill out a form.
No, you're fine. And I'm going to awkwardly stand over here because I have to be videotaped here. So, first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I know I'm the random graduate student that comes to your TBT meetings on Wednesday morning. But my name's Olivia, and I am a master's student. I'm in the Master's of Reading program at BG. I'm a licensed middle school teacher, graduated from the middle childhood program last May. And I'm licensed to teach language arts and science, which is probably the furthest thing you get from high school social studies. When I'm here at Fostoria on Mondays and Wednesdays, I work with 3 students that Mrs. Stoltz helped me identify as at-risk students, and I've been administering a series of assessments to them. I'm going to go back and analyze those assessments, write some case reports, and then make some suggestions for academic accommodations for them. And then when I'm not doing that, I also work in the classroom with Mrs. Stoltz. I give some lessons how to integrate reading and writing into social studies. So I got to pick the topic of my professional development session in my audience, so lucky you. I wanted to pick something that could kind of give back to you. I know this is something you've been working on your students, or working on with your students, so we're going to talk about some strategies for informational text. And before we get started, I was just kind of wondering how you all feel as social studies teachers. Do you think it's your responsibility to teach reading in addition to social studies? And that's not a loaded question, you can be completely honest. But do you think that that's one of your responsibilities as a teacher, to teach reading? Yeah. Okay, good. So I mean, I'm a little biased, but I obviously think that every kind of teacher should be teaching reading. We talk about content standards that are career and college ready, and I don't understand how we could send students off into the real world without some aspect of reading, the ability to be able to read a job application, a college application, all that stuff. So I'm going to start this presentation, and just as a quick video.
Literacy and numeracy should be celebrated every week, not just in 1 week. I think it's so tremendously important, and the main reason for me is that literacy opens up the ability to have access to limitless numbers of ideas, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and the ability to communicate your thoughts and ideas. The ability to write and the ability to read opens countless numbers of doors. So it was really interesting. I saw Henry Rollins recently. He just spoke a word, and he was talking about literacy. He travelled the world, and he's talking a lot about, in third world nations where people are robbed of their power to have a rich and full life by their inability to be literate. And I mean, it's a very, very big discussion, but in terms of children here, it's the same as anywhere. It opens up the possibility of a vast, limitless number of ideas, which is what it's all about, really. And that's what I find fascinating. The nuts and bolts of it, the actual forming the letters and learning to read them. I've got a 6-year-old, so we're going through that process at the moment. It's a beautiful thing, and it obviously in very simple ways, you know that's the exit, whatever, you can write down your dad's name or whatever. But ultimately, the destination point is the ability to be able to have everything, the entire world open to you as a possibility because of your ability to read anything that's written down or to write and express and communicate what you feel about things or what you feel.
All right. So I know that through your TBT meetings, we talked a lot about using the Frame It as one of your strategies for teaching informational text. Is there anything else that any of you do to teach informational text besides the Frame It? No? Okay. Well, that's all right. Hopefully you'll be able to glean some things from this presentation that you can maybe take back to your own classroom. The first thing I want to talk about is just reviewing text features. I know that's really basic and something that they probably do in an English classroom. But I think about myself as a student, and when I'm reading through a textbook, I come across a chart or a big picture, and I say, well, that's one less thing I have to read. And I usually skip over that information, and I know that the high schoolers are the exact same way, but all of that information is usually, it's there for a reason, and looking at the title, looking at subtitles, keywords, bullet points, all those things are very important and something to remind students of as one of their strategies for reviewing their informational text. So once you talk about utilizing those informational or the nonfiction text features, you can have them make predictions. Make predictions about what they're reading based on the title, based on the pictures, and you can use this statement with them. I think I'm going to learn this, and this is why. So if you see a picture of the Declaration of Independence, you can say, I think I'm going to be learning about the Declaration of Independence because there's a picture of the Declaration of Independence. And it's just getting students to make predictions before they even start reading and make connections with the text. The next thing I want to talk about is evidence-based questioning, and this is something I've been trying with Mrs. Stoltz's students. The teacher goes through, they preview a text, they pick out 3 to 5 important questions that they think get covered in the text, and then they actually go back and find that answer in the text. They underline it or highlight, they show where they're actually finding the answer in the text. And this is an important skill that they can use when they're taking their OGT or whatever assessment is that you have to give them. Another thing we talked about was text coding. So when a student goes through and reads a piece of text, they can mark it different ways. So something that they know, maybe something that contradicts what they think they know, question. I might suggest taking out the last one because you might see that more often than you want to. But just this is a way for them to review a piece of text and then go back into it and easily find things that they found while they were reading. Post-it note prioritizing, I like this. It's a summary based skill, but it's for working with informational text. You give them a stack of Post-it notes and then some informational text that they're going to read through. You can divide it up by paragraph or by section, and then they go through and they summarize the important key details. And this is something that can be done on an individual basis, or it can be done as a class as well. Say you start covering a new chapter, you split it up into different sections, have different groups cover the different sections, then you can have like a gallery walk around the room and just everyone can share what they learned. So this is one of my favorite ways to work on summary as well as that informational text. This is called Word Splash. This is a vocabulary-based activity. This requires the teacher to go in and preview the text again. And then they're going to pick out some key words, and then they're going to write them up on the board. The students look at them out of context, so they're just the key words, and they try to predict how those words might fit together and what they might mean together. And then they go through and read the actual text, and they compare and contrast what they found. So I have a template that I can show you just to make this a little clearer. So I have an example. So you would go through, you would read an article, and you would pick out some vocabulary words like this. And then the students would have to go through and try to figure out how these words might fit together. So this is before they've done any informational text reading. They would go through, just write a couple quick sentences as a summary, and when they're done, they would go through, read that informational text, and then compare and contrast what they found with what they thought beforehand. And so that's just an example, but I also made like a template that you could use with your class as well. And if you're interested in any of these resources, if you give me your email address, I can send them to you.
They do this after they read, or it's prediction?
It's going to be before and after they read. So they go in, they would see these words that you have picked out, and before they read the actual text, they would try to predict how those words fit together. So that whatever they can come up with, and then they go through and actually read the text, and then they would compare and contrast what they found. So were they right? Did they need to make some adjustments? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to stay over here for this one because I have some more templates for you. I like graphic organizers. I'm a very visual learner, and I think this is a great way to break down informational text for students. I came up with some templates that you all can use. Cause and effect, compare and contrast, and 3, 2, 1. Are we all familiar with what 3, 2, 1 is? No? Yeah? Okay.
No.
3, 2, 1 is you go through, you read informational text, you write down 3 things that you learned while you were reading it, 2 cool or interesting facts, and then 1 question that you might have to ask the teacher about when you're done reading it. So I have some examples and some templates for you all to look at as well. So this would be cause and effect. You've got your keywords up at the top that would indicate that there's cause and effect in the reading. And then they can fill out what event led to the next and the next and the next. So that's a template that you could use. I also have compare and contrast. I like this template a little bit more than just a Venn diagram. I think it's more high school appropriate. You can compare your 2 topics, how they're different and still how they're the same. So the same idea, all the same information, just a little bit different of layout. And then this is the 3, 2, 1. So 3 things you learned, 2 things you found interesting, and 1 question that you might have. Okay. Has anyone ever heard of Wordle before? Yeah. Okay, so I don't really need to go too in-depth in it. But basically, you would go through, do your reading. The student would pick out key terms and key concepts, and you just type them in the website, and this makes it for you, the word cloud for you. Takes a lot of work out of it, but it gives the student the opportunity to show what they learned and what they thought was the important from their reading. And then another one is class discussions. We all know if you can talk about something, you probably know what you're talking about. You're comfortable discussing ideas and things that were presented in a reading. I know that high schoolers aren't usually always
prepared to participate in class and maybe speak in class. So I found some different websites that are good for online discussions. And I wanted to show you the top one here. It's called Edmodo. Has anyone ever heard of Edmodo? Yeah. So it's very similar to the Facebook interface.